Welcome to this first class, which we are entitling Anglicanism, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. So I'll give a deeper introduction to what we'll be going through next week, but I want to give most of our time today to Dean Willis, who is with us today. So the Anglican Communion, which we'll be looking at, is comprised of 46 different provinces. It is in 165 different countries. And it is unique among some of the Christian denominations for its structure. And so we'll be looking into some of that. But today I wanted to spend this time with Dean Willis as his role as Dean Emeritus of Canterbury Cathedral. And so from his unique vantage point, looking at some of the things that make Anglicanism so wonderful and make the Anglican Communion a unique expression of Christianity and what that means for us and some of the challenges that will present for us as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Not at all. It's great to be here. Thank you.
One thing you said last night, we had a dinner with Dean Willis last night as part of the fundraiser for the pilgrimage to Canterbury in 2025. But one thing you said last night was thinking about how to grow a cathedral like Canterbury. And you said that it is part of the nature of it is that when you're there, it belongs to you. So this belonging and this being a part of it is very much of what I experienced of it versus other cathedrals or churches in Europe. When I went there, I felt like that was mine. I had possession of it. So I think that that's something that starts off our conversation. So tell us, what is the significance of Canterbury in our Anglican tradition?
Well, it began all those years ago in 597, when Augustine was sent by Gregory. Gregory had wanted to come himself, Gregory the Great as he became, and set off from Rome. There's the old story of him seeing two fair-haired children in the slave market and asking who they were, and the slave master said, "Oh, they are Angles from England. They are Angles." And in Latin, he replied, "Non Angli," said Angeli, not Angles, but angels. And then he found that the Christian gospel had been taken when the Roman Empire had England, but they had long since gone. And so there were vestiges of Christianity left there, but mostly it was a pagan country. And so Gregory decided he would go and convert England, the Angles, to Christianity. And he got partway down the road on the way to England and stopped to say his midday office and had the book on his lap and his chaplain next to him. And the book had a locust land on it. And the chaplain said the words, locus ista, it's a locust. But it's very, very like locus sta, which means stay here in this place. And Gregory heard, stay here in this place. And soon after, horsemen arrived to say, "You've actually been elected Pope. You're not going to England." So off he went back and chose one of his monks from the monastery, and Fetch and I have been to this monastery, which was originally Gregory's family, who was very well-to-do and of the political status in Rome at that time. He'd made it into a monastery. His chair is still there, and we've had the privilege actually of celebrating our communion at the altar there, which was terrific. But it meant that Augustine had to come. He took 40 monks and got as far as Arles, and then got cold feet and stopped. I mean, anyone would stop at Arles. It's so beautiful. But at that stage, Gregory was really wise. He took the illuminated Gospels from his library, beautiful illuminated Gospels, sent them to Arles and said, "This is the gift for the King of Kent," who was a pagan but had a Christian queen. Now Augustine couldn't stop because he was a messenger for the Pope to take that. And all began there. And so already there was a little Roman church from the old occupation, which Queen Bertha, who was a French princess and she was Christian, was using. But when they arrived, after a while, Ethelbert himself, her husband, became Christian and was baptized by Augustine. We don't know how much arm twisting Bertha had done, but she was clearly... and then Christianity began to spread from Canterbury. Now, Gregory said to Augustine, my message, go on to London and make your capital. And Augustine said, no, I like it here. So Canterbury became the starting point for the re-Christianization of England. The gospel had been brought before with the Roman armies, but when they left, others came and invaded the land who were pagans. So that's why it became so special. And later on, it became even more special when the break with Rome took place at the Reformation. It meant there was a new strand of worship which became Ecclesia Anglicana, the Church of England, and that's our Episcopal Anglican strand. And because of the way in which the English language spread across the Atlantic to here and all around the world eventually, that became something that was taken with it. But I want to say something very special about the Episcopal Church of the United States of America, because quite often people say, well, Anglicanism is really only the British Empire at prayer. And so it's just a carry on. But this church denies that, because at the American War of Independence, everything stopped, and the Episcopal strand was actually pretty well taken into Canada and left here with a few. But it was decided that it was such an important strand of the Holy Catholic Church in its balance and the way it saw things, both sort of Catholic and Protestant, and taking what they call a via media, a path down the middle. The Episcopal Church of the States is showing that it's not just a leftover. It was actually lost and thought precious enough to found again. And so you are really special in the Anglican Communion for doing that. It's a witness to the fact that it's not just a carry-on in those lands, but it certainly has a loyalty to Canterbury still, and the cathedral is the sign of that. Sorry, I'm speaking too much, but
no, it's wonderful. I think that speaks to what we often call the contextualization.
Yeah.
And so within the Anglican Communion, with all of these different provinces, with all of these different countries and languages, the contextualization of the Christian faith is so important to creating the ethos of who we are as Anglicans. One thing that I think is a strength of ours, and I think I would love to hear your insights on this, but is our common prayer. So
yes.
When I was a missionary in Lesotho, where we would do morning prayer every day in Sesotho, which I did not speak. But I knew where we were in the service because of the common structure and because of the common prayer that I shared with Anglicans, both there but also here at home. So what does it do to pray with this communion of Christians on a daily basis? What does it do to us internally?
Well, I think it's a wonderful feeling of homecoming when you get to a place where you've never been before, and a culture you are only just beginning to learn, and yet you feel this instant sense of, well, I'm at home here. I recognize what's being done. This is morning prayer. This is evening prayer. Here are the Psalms. This is the communion service, and so on. And I suppose I first learned that when I was speaking last night about being sent by the Bishop of Salisbury to set up a link between the Salisbury Diocese and the Sudan, which was totally war-torn, and the cathedrals and churches of Christian South Sudan they'd been mostly thatched roofs on Gothic stone buildings put up by the missionaries there, and the thatch had all been burnt off, and the people had been persecuted in that way. And so I was sent out to find out. I was fairly scared going all by myself to this setup, because I didn't know Africa at all at that time. But I needn't have worried, because there was this sense of being totally at home in that Anglican atmosphere. And later on in Tanzania, doing the same. I discovered that the mission agency which had converted that part of Tanzania was the university's mission to Central Africa, and they always insisted that worship had to take place in the language of the people there. Whereas in the Sudan, the missionaries had taken the Book of Common Prayer just as it was, and so they stumbled through in English, but gradually in the Civil War, they began to sing their own songs out in the jungles because they were frightened to be anywhere near the Arab armies that were taking over the south. But so there were two very different ways of doing it, and it's like Captain Fitzroy in the Darwin stories, who was taking sort of chamber pots and petticoats to the people of Tierra del Fuego, as though that was to be a Christian, you had to behave like a Victorian family in that way. And it's very important to separate what is of the faith and what is of the culture. One of the things that Gregory said to Augustine was, whatever you find there, try not to change too much, but use it. So that a lot of things which had been, in festival terms, pagan, were Christianized because it was easier for the people to understand what was going on. I mean, a couple of weeks' time we have bonfires, which are set up because of we call it Guy Fawkes Day, but there were always bonfires in pagan England because of the winter being driven away. And so the church's calendar placing sort of All Saints bang in the middle of that, and Christmas right in the middle of winter. There's no way of knowing when the date of Christmas was, and it's a later festival anyway than Easter. We know when Easter date was because of the Paschal full moon, but this one is different. And so some things are of the culture, and other things are of the faith, and that is a very difficult decision to have to make. I've just preached about duty to Caesar and duty to ourselves and our faith, and duty to God, and those things we never get relieved from having to make decisions ourselves. And Augustine had to make many decisions, as did the ones who come after him. So
I think you alluded to this, but in terms of, one could argue that the Anglican Communion as it stands today, it has shifted from a place of empire to a place of relationship.
Yes.
That might be too
No,
binary,
I think that's,
but I think that's part of what's happening.
I think that's hardly an argument.
Okay.
That's where it is.
Right.
In going to places, I was very aware that I was the guest in the Church of Kenya, the Church of the Sudan, the Church of Tanzania, and I wasn't there coming out to sort of tell them what to do. I was the one who had to learn, and I did that. And the very special nature of being an Anglican is that, and being an Anglican priest, is that you arrive and you're instantly a treasured guest. And a guest in those cultures, and here again is what is of the culture and what is of the faith, a guest is utterly precious and takes precedence over everything. So when you arrive as a guest, there is a whole formality. And it's similar in Sudan and Tanzania and probably in Lesotho, that the first thing that happens to you is not what you want, but the senior son of the house comes with a bowl of water and offers you water to wash your hands and wash your feet or whatever if you're wearing sandals and are dusty. And you're offered food and drink before ever the question, what do you want? Because this taking care of a guest is a sacred trust, and you probably found that as well.
Very much so.
Two things, one of them didn't help me at the time, but two things help you a great deal if you're a guest. The other one is white hair. Because the honor given to someone with white hair is something, or age is something that we've lost here. But there's great respect, even when people become muddled, and in that. And I remember a bishop chiding me about even not waiting for my own father to walk along the cloister in Hereford. He says, wait for the mzee, and the mzee means respected old man, for what he was, he still is. And that too is a lovely gift of the culture in that way. But there's an amusing story of Archbishop Ramsey, who, with the Swahili, if you're an ordinary person going along, they'll say jambo, which means hello. If you're a respected older person, they will say shikamu, which means greetings, respected older person. And the answer to that is marahaba. And Archbishop Ramsey could not remember that, and his chaplain said, just say Mother Hubbard.
So common prayer is a strength of our communion, and hospitality and relationship building are a strength of our communion. What are some of the other strengths in your opinion?
I think the sense of, if you make a friendship, we belong to a throwaway culture in a very big way, so that a gift given is something that is, oh, thank you very much, that's lovely of you to do that, and we'll put it on the mantelpiece, and there we are. And at the same time, a letter sent, because those were days when there weren't mobile phones or texts or anything of that sort, but a letter sent is something that we might do, but when you leave a place, especially if you're travelling from place to place, you tend to be quite forgetful. But that never happens in these cultures. If the bonding of friendship and relationship is massive. And one of my most treasured possessions, having spent about 3 weeks waiting for a plane which wasn't coming, I'll talk about that in a bit, and I was with the Bishop of Omdurman, which is in Khartoum, the other side of the River Nile from the old city. And I was the guests of Bishop Boutros and his wife Dorcas. And the last day he was a very shy and quiet-spoken man, and he came with his wife bearing something white covered in coloured beads like a net, and it was a blown ostrich egg. And he said, this is for you. It's a sign of friendship. You'll carry it very carefully and always be conscious that you've got it, because it's not too fragile, but it could break. And so put it in your hand luggage, and then that will be a sign of our friendship. And it was quite right. I mean, on the aeroplane, I was, but we still have this ostrich egg in the drawing room at the farmhouse at home, there in a glass cabinet, which is a sign of Boutros and all his sons, who had been the first people to meet me at Khartoum airport when I landed, and was feeling very sort of lost at that time. In the middle of the night we landed, and the plane was, I think, about 19 hours late. And I needed to work, because I thought, well, what do I do when I get there? Nobody will know me. It'll be the middle of the night, and they won't have waited that long. Of course they will wait that long. They would have waited twice that length of time. So it's those things which actually bring you up sharp at how throwaway our culture is.
It's nice when the gift fits in a bag, though, because I was once traveling with the Bishop of Lesotho, and he was given 3 sheep to take back. And that becomes difficult at some point. So given the nature of the communion, being in all of the different countries we are, having the relationships that we've formed, I think the Anglican communion has a unique advantage in tackling some of the problems that this world's faced because of our networks and because of the relationships we've formed. So I'm curious to think, or to hear your thoughts on what are some of those issues that we have a distinct advantage to help tackle and be a witness to in this world.
Well, we have a distinct advantage to help tackle, but we also have a sort of disadvantage at having gone to teach things in a particular way, which that culture now finds very difficult to move on from. And then they accuse you of being unfaithful to your original teaching, which was given in 1880, and society here has moved on, and it hasn't there. So that again becomes a distinction between the faith and the culture, and the holding together of the communion I think has been something of a miracle up till now. I can see that the Christianity has a story of fragmentation and then rebonding. So you actually would say that the first millennium of Christianity was a millennium of sort of unity between Orthodox East and Western Catholic church people there. And then the second millennium was a millennium of fragmentation, because Rome split from Constantinople, and then the Reformation happened, and then all kinds of other things happened. So Methodism wasn't happy with the discipline, which was fairly lax in the Church of England in the 18th century, and it began to fragment. But now there's good relations between so many of those who did fragment, but at the same time, there are threatened, we're going to walk away from this. Often I've seen at Canterbury and at primates meetings, the saying of that and the doing of that is really quite hard, because people say, well, we're not staying of that sort. But we found that the cathedral itself was such a magnet of loyalty on the part of those who felt it wasn't to England, it was to this spot where things had begun. And so I was very keen when we had the Lambeth Conference in 2008, the Rowan Williams one, that the cathedral should be used as much as possible, and never, ever, I think I said this last night, never to take a vote in which would exclude people who disagreed and cast them out, because that would be really difficult to put back together again. You can do that in synod chambers, you can do that in political things. You can't do it with a holy space which belongs to everybody. And we felt, certainly Fletcher and I ran the deanery in a way that showed our belief in the fact that not just the cathedral, but the whole grounds within the community of Canterbury, because the cathedral precinct is walled all the way round, belonged especially to the Anglican Communion. But we also, as I said last night, any visitor coming in took ownership of that place, and we were simply stewards to give the sort of hospitality that I'd received in Khartoum and Nairobi, and even with Maoris later on in the South Seas and goodness knows what, and just having a sense of, gosh, this really is wonderful.
So with one of the things to come out of the last Lambeth conference 2 years ago was this push for ecological justice and climate change. And I know with the videos that you and Fletcher did in the gardens, that is a passion of yours.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a passion of the communion. So
yes, it is. Well, and it's a passion of the communion, which is easy to see why when you travel the communion. And we didn't only have Lambeth conferences going on in Canterbury, we had times when students, seminarians from all over the world would gather for 3 weeks, and they'd be chosen by their bishops as people who might later on be leaders, but they had to have a working knowledge of English, otherwise in 3 weeks you wouldn't get very far. But when they came, they told stories about how they went out to see their parishes. And it was quite incredible to see those of us who would just get in the car and drive down the road, listening to someone who had to get out a boat and row to another island and for Christmas Eve to do 3 midnights going around in great danger and all of those things. But the Pacific has become something which is ecologically challenged in such a way, and all those beautiful places. I went out in, let's just think what year that was, 1992, to do what we used to do as a partners in mission exercise. They're too expensive to do now, I think. It's not done in the same way. But groups from various churches would go and help a church to plan their next few years. And it was New Zealand, Aotearoa we were doing. And so out I went. I'd never been there before. Very, very long flight. And received, again, with warm hospitality. And discovered then in New Zealand there are 3 strands of culture. And the Pākehā, which is European, the Maori, and then the Pacific islands around. And all those 3 strands were having difficulty in keeping together an authority, because the bishops until then had all been European, Pākehā. And so authority needed to be shared around, and so we had quite a time over the 2 months there, and there were lots of tears and lots of squabbles and things, but in the end some kind of agreement was reached. And I will remember then 3 communions were organized, 1, 2, 3, and the 3 last days. And the first one was the Pākehā one. So we sang, things like, "Oh God, our help in ages past," and stuff like that. And then the next one was a Maori one, and the Maori songs were wonderful. They sort of swayed as they danced and so on. And then the last one was the Pacific Islands, and this wonderful music, such as you get in South Pacific, I could hear when I was walking towards the hall, and I was with the Bishop of Southall at the time, and the Pacific Islanders were at the door giving shell necklaces out and placing them round your neck. And so they were on the arm of the person there. And being with the bishop, I said, "You go first, my lord, do." And he went in, and this magnificent shell necklace was put around his neck. And the next one was just sort of small, insignificant one. And so I thought, "Dash, if I'd not said go in first, I'd have had that one." So we then actually went into the communion, and in the middle, the bishop of the southern island people said, "Now in this we give a gift of shells, but now we come to the giving of the peace. And at this you turn to the person next to you, who happened to be the bishop, and you exchange necklaces." So I then felt guilty, because I thought... And then the bishop said, "But this is not for you. You take it back, and you will know when the time comes to give it away to a particular person that's in need." But this is all sort of culture stuff again, and everything about it was about the things of the land and the sense of Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, and all of that going on, so that the rhythm was the rhythm of the sea. And there's I think it's moana, which is that's right, isn't it? And the primate of Aotearoa used to use this and say, you just sense the moana, the rhythm of the sea. It will tell you. But that's, if we sense the rhythm of the sea in Cornwall, it would be very different, So, yeah.
And the New Zealand prayer book is such a fascinating look at the contextualization that can happen within the Anglican community. Part of what they did with the New Zealand prayer book is they took prayers that were in English, translated them into Maori, and then retranslated that prayer back into English. And so you get these prayers that are deeply, deeply ingrained in the culture of a place, and they pull out these different expressions, and you can start to understand their own connection to the land and how deeply ingrained that is within their culture. So it's a fascinating way to look at how the Anglican communion can spread and contextualize, and yet still keep the commonality that we have.
Sure, yeah. And the no service in New Zealand would take place with simply English all the way through. There'd always be, the priest would say sentences in Maori on the way through. Yeah.
One thing I appreciate about the communion is the ability to look to leaders in different places when there is intentional or where there is conflict. So take the Holy Land right now, where it is a very complicated issue that is unfolding, but we have direct connection into Archbishop Hassan, a whole leader of churches there that help us understand the deeply complicated issues that are happening from our own tradition, our own language, to say. So I have appreciated that so immensely. So I'm wondering for you, are there relationships that you have formed out in the communion that you would have had no other way of creating? And are there any ones that are particularly interesting for you?
Well, you talk about the bishop in Jerusalem, and he, when he was the dean there before, came. And he comes from a family of long standing there, and he was having lunch around the table at the deanery, and somebody who, I can't remember who it was not one of our sort of people having lunch there, said to him, "When did your family become Christian?" And he said, "Well, probably about 1800 years ago. and that was a real facer, because you could see the puzzlement in the person's eyes there. So these things, but also the depths of relationship that you can form in those circles. The lovely thing about being in our position is that when you go there, you actually live with the people, and they look after you in the tukals, the thatched huts in their circle around. So what did one learn there? You learn the gift of silence, because if there's nothing to say, you don't say it. Whereas we always have to fill a silence because we're embarrassed by it, around there, that kind of thing. And you sit under the stars with no electric lights on the ground for miles around, and so except the odd sort of generator thing. And it's a completely different experience in that way. But you also get the sense of the way in which the family works, and who does what, and so on, and the wildlife as well is just astonishing. So everything becomes very different in the society you're in, and we find that even in the States, going to different areas here. We're astonished by the beauty of the United States, because it's vast, and England is very small. But going up on the train or in the car in Connecticut at the moment, and up through to Massachusetts, the colours of the fall and the colours of the ocean. And I always used to think those pictures were touched up by artists until I saw it. But it's just astonishing, and that you get that all over.
Absolutely. My last question for you before we open it up for a little bit of questions. The communion now is in a place of conflict, but as we've already talked about, conflict is not necessarily new to the communion. Started from a place of conflict with the Reformation. One of the most, horrible times in English history is right following the Reformation until Elizabeth comes in. So this is not new to us. Yeah. So to what extent is conflict part of our heritage, but also what are your dreams for how we can move forward from this conflict? And what are your dreams for the communion?
Well, let's go much farther back than the English Reformation, to the Council of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And also something like the split between Barnabas and Saul, or Paul, was so sharp over whether they take Mark or not, that they just sort of split up. And to the church's loss, Barnabas sort of sails out of the picture, taking Mark off to Cyprus to another missionary journey. So I expect there to be grit. And also I expect perspectives to be long. It's no good thinking this is something that we can set right. It's like a family split, and yet the family still is there. And we've certainly had in our garden congregation relations, and Fletcher will testify to this, families who had completely split up. And then one person in the family started watching. It might be a mother, and she hadn't spoken to her son for ages. And she would then, through the garden congregation, say, I've been challenged by the fact that I'm completely split from whatever his name was or so. And your advice, I know, always was, don't be afraid to pick up the phone, and you'll find probably that the same feeling is on the other side. And 9 times out of 10, that was the case. But time had to pass. And in that time, as it passed, there was often great bitterness. And the story as it's told on both sides in any kind of family squabble is different, because people see it through different eyes. So the things that are going on in the Anglican community at the moment, and especially in the African nations where cultures are different, and they're facing enormous numbers of Islamic people who have a different cultural aspect to all of this, and think some of the things will be, just dire sin, and so you could take that from same-gender relationships, or even the position of women in society, all of those things. But if we believe in them, then we really do have to hold the banner high, but challenge ourselves. And that's what the morning and daily office in the reading of the scriptures does, because as you read those scriptures, you realize what is being said to you, and it's not, when you can read it 6 times over, because the job of the dean in a cathedral is to read the New Testament lesson morning and evening every day if you're there. And I would think, oh, last year that tuned to me in this particular way, but it's now speaking to me like that, and I see what that's meaning. And so words have a way of just coming into the situation in a different form. So I'm never depressed when those things happen, but I am very depressed when the wars break out with such destruction and mortality, which is happening at the moment, and people are believing that they are so right. And you can pick out strands of justice on both sides, and also strands of, I wouldn't call it bad behavior, because it sort of springs out of the desperation of something that's going on. So there are no easy answers. No. But the Anglican Communion is not a, should we say, it's not a papacy, so that what the Archbishop of Canterbury says about a situation carries no weight in terms of the Archbishop of Nigeria would be just as independent as he. So the whole thing is a wanting to stay together. There's nothing more than that. And the instruments of unity are there to help. But essentially, it's something we have to believe in. It's not terribly well known. I don't know how it is in the States, but probably if you went into parishes in the southwest of England, in farming countries and stuff, and said, "Are you Anglican?" they'd say, "Well, we're Church of England." And so, you know, it's something that isn't in everyone's mind, but I think we believe in it. Yeah.
Well, that sets us up perfectly for the next 3 weeks. So come back and join us, and we'll dig into the things and the polity that kind of structures who we are. But I do want to leave some time for questions. And just to note, we have a hard out at 10 so that we can make it to the 10:15. So we won't have time to linger in here and chat with Dean Willis, but stay after the 10:15 where we have a reception.
Around,
and you can talk to both Fletcher and Dean Willis and have a wonderful time. So, questions?
Yes, Andrew.
You mentioned to me yesterday that you had been to the Holy
Yes.
once. And so, did the first time around make it the story of Jesus and all those other characters more real to you?
Oh, God, yeah, very definitely. There will be people here probably in the same way. It sort of blows one away. And you, as a priest, having the privilege of celebrating on the shepherd's fields, looking down on Bethlehem, and we were talking about Phillips Brooks's, carol written on Christmas Eve after the American Civil War, and both parts of his family had been involved on either side, and he found himself riding over on horseback from Jerusalem and looking down at the city of Bethlehem, and hence the carol, how silently, all those things you find yourself, or celebrating at the altar where Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem, or just standing by the Sea of Galilee, or by the River Jordan. All those things actually are unchanged. At the same time, I remember my irritation of the noise in Jerusalem when I was trying to walk the way of the cross. And then I thought, what am I saying? It must have been like that, just like that, on the day of the crucifixion, just with street marketers, bustling around and nudging out of the way. So I think it's the world we live in, and I wouldn't have missed it for worlds, actually. You've been, I'm sure.
I haven't actually.
Oh, well, it's well worth it.
It's time.
Yeah.
I heard you talk on this a little bit last night. Your thoughts on pilgrimage as a modern event?
That is one of the great growth points. And I was saying last night about our new hostel that we've opened, having bought a hotel, a group of folk who've got together. And Fletcher and I spent the second of the 2 weeks that we've been there. Now it was open, the bishop blessed it about a month ago now, and brought a new icon for that. But to see the numbers of people, young people, all sorts of people walking the Camino is really heartening. And when they come, and what is even more heartening is the great common room in the place that we bought, where breakfast is provided and in the morning, and a bottle of wine is there in the evening, and stories are shared by the pilgrims And the most important thing that seems to be said was, I came on this pilgrimage thinking I was doing this, and I've discovered on the way through that my, completely new insights on the road. So I could go on about that quite long. There is actually one of the films that we made, like the Garden Congregation films, Fletcher made a film about being in the hostel in Santiago. It's just about 5 minutes walk from the Basilica. And it's online now on Garden Congregation. If you look up Santiago on the Garden Congregation, there's a half-hour video, I should think, about it. And it's been on there about 5 days. It's already had 6,500 hits. So it is actually a very popular thing to be doing, pilgrimage. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more.
Yep.
Do you and Fletcher have plans for writing a book?
Well, shall I say it's finding the time, but at the same time, yeah, the book I think that we'd like to put together is just the story of the Garden Congregation with his pictures, and something that just explains our own surprise and the way it developed. And I think I was thinking of calling it something like A Garden Congregation, the story of an unexpected journey. And then it would be pictures, and then how the thing went through for the 26 months without a day missing it was, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
No, not at all,
for this
Jared. Thanks so much
time.
indeed.
This
Thank
has
you.
been wonderful, and I do hope you'll join us for the rest of this series. So next week at 9:15 in here again, and Dean Willis will be preaching at 10:15. So please join us then, and we're going to disappear now. So thanks, everybody.